Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Hey team, welcome to episode 2 of the podcast. I mentioned this last time as well, but I wanted to use these first 2 podcasts to talk about 2 topics that are really at the core of the work that I do with my clients. So last time we talked about energy, and this time we're going to talk about authenticity. If we want to use the metaphor of having a car, which of course is top of mind for me right now because it's one of my son's favorite words, he's always saying ka, or like now he's figured out possessive. So he says mama's ka, or he doesn't say mama's, he says mama ka and papa ka. And he'll stand in the driveway and point to both of our cars. So cars are top of mind. If we want to liken it to a metaphor about cars, energy is obviously the gas in the car. But authenticity is the GPS of the car. Authenticity is what tells you the destination and also the journey that will feel right to you. When you have a GPS, you can choose whether you take freeways or surface streets or this street or that, for example. And this is one of the many ways in which authenticity and energy are linked. Because one of the most effective ways to waste an enormous amount of energy or an enormous amount of gas is to not know where you want to go. Even if you have a ton of gas, you can use it all up and then some if you're not driving with sufficient authenticity. You can spend all year, all decade driving around to places that are just not right for you. And I'm talking about, this concept of where you want to go because this is a car metaphor. But in life, authenticity also just tells you information about every single bit of your life, how that meeting at work affected you and how that relationship, that one conversation you had with that person truly impacted you. I often also liken it to being able to sense the texture of your life. And you need that information in order to know your values, in order to know what relationships are important to you, in order to know how you want to proceed in basically every area of your life. You need that functional GPS. So today I want to talk about first what authenticity is. I want to define it in a way that's actionable. And then I want to talk about how you can cultivate more of it. So first of all, let's talk about what authenticity is. So my definition of authenticity, this is not the dictionary's definition, my definition is the skill of knowing yourself profoundly. The skill of knowing yourself profoundly. And there's 3 parts of that I want to break down and talk a bit more about. The skill, knowing yourself, and profoundly. Let's talk about knowing yourself first. So what does it mean to really know yourself? What are you actually knowing? I think the key here to this is that even if your authenticity could use some more development, and many of ours could, it's not that you don't know yourself at all. So I don't want you to just tune out of this podcast to say like, well, I know myself. It's not that I don't know myself, because you probably do know yourself. You probably know quite a lot of yourself. You know that you like baking sourdough bread and you love catching up with your friends, or you know that you like ice hockey and dim sum and the sound of your teenager's laugh. All of us know ourselves in a lot of ways. But in my coaching practice, there's 2 particularly important things that we need to know: the body and the mind. Let's talk about the body first. Knowing yourself in your own body means, to me, being in touch with the physical sensations your body is sending you as you move through your life. So most of us have experienced this on the more extreme side of things. So you felt sick to your stomach when you asked for a raise, or you felt a bodily feeling of elation when you were planning a dream vacation. Or maybe you were furious about something, like a betrayal, and you could feel your whole body hot and tight. Or, and I definitely have experienced this one, I bet you have too, maybe there's some sort of intense sensation of attraction in your body when you think about somebody that you've just started dating, that you're infatuated with. Maybe it's a buzzing or a vibration throughout your body. All of those things are bodily sensations. I also call them somatic sensations, which just means being related to the body. Those intense sensations that I just talked about, intense anger or intense fear or intense excitement or attraction, those might be your body sensations at a 9 or a 10 on a 10-point scale, maybe an 8. But the key here is that you're actually having somatic sensations constantly, literally every second of your day. Most of those body sensations are actually much lower on the 10-point scale. They're 6s and 4s and 2s. And the reason why this matters is that if you want to know how you feel about something in your life, if you want authentic information about how you feel in your life, your body is one of the best navigational pieces of equipment you have. If you become more skillful at listening to it, you can get a lot of information about what to do when you're making tough decisions, or what to prioritize, or what's wrong when you have this sneaking sense that something's wrong, but you don't know what it is. And I will say, for the super woo-woo skeptical out there, I know I have some of you in my audience, when I talk about bodily sensations, the brain is obviously involved too. It's just that there's so much happening in the brain on the sort of non-prefrontal cortex part of the brain, or in the non-prefrontal cortex part of the brain, that you may not be aware of, because the prefrontal cortex is where the conscious thinking happens. So there's all this kind of stuff happening in your brain that you're just sort of not consciously aware of at any given point in time. So what's happening with this body sensation stuff is there is a part of you that knows something. Yes, even in your brain, but you might never consciously realize that you know. You might never connect the dots on that unless you noticed the bodily reaction first. So an example of this might be you have a sick feeling in your stomach around someone and you really couldn't say why. And you might not have even been tipped off at all that there might have been something wrong with your relationship with that person if you hadn't noticed the body sensation first. So the body sensation is the kind of way in. Your conscious brain might have just skimmed right over it, and it could take a really long time, or it might never catch up with the subconscious brain. It might never float up to the top of your brain if your body hadn't tipped you off on it first. So most of us listening to this podcast, I suspect, don't pick up on the non-extreme versions of these bodily signals. Even if we're reasonably intellectually sophisticated, even if we're self-aware, we've done therapy, we've done journaling, you've perhaps listened to some other self-development podcasts before, and yet we're spending most of our days living in our heads. And only the most intense bodily sensations are making it through. This topic absolutely merits its own podcast, probably even several, but I just wanted to introduce the idea here that the skill of being able to notice and get information from your bodily sensations is intimately tied to authenticity. So that's the body in terms of knowing yourself. And now let's talk about the mind. Knowing yourself by knowing your mind, to me, means knowing what you actually think about all the key parts of your life. So most people who find their way to my audience do have some kind of awareness of their thoughts. And typically it's not too bad, but often there's still a lot of room here. So I'll ask my clients questions like, what are you resisting? And even that one I freaking love. Even if you just stop the podcast right here and just ask yourself, what am I resisting? Or what am I resisting knowing? I bet there's a lot of juice for you right there, but we'll keep going. A variation on that question that I also often ask is, what are you afraid of knowing? I ask, what energizes versus drains you, which is a callback to the last episode. What would you admit to yourself if you weren't afraid that it would blow up your life? And as a side note here, often we don't actually have to blow up our lives, but the fear that we would keeps us from knowing certain things that are authentically true for us. I often ask questions like, what would be your dream life? What are your values? And finally, how do you want to feel? And that last one is so good. So many of us know our big goals, like I want to have another kid, I want to kill it at my job, or get a promotion, or write a book. But why do you want it? How do you think it will actually make you feel? Even knowing that can really shift the direction and means by which you achieve your goals. So that's knowing yourself. So if authenticity is the skill of knowing yourself profoundly, we've talked about knowing yourself. Now let's talk about profoundly. The authenticity that I'm talking about is a pretty deep level of self-knowledge. It's not just the thoughts that are obvious or those bodily reactions when they're at a 10. It's actually really subtle things. And it's not just the things that are pleasant to know, like, I'm a very nice person and I want to be generous to this other person. It's also all of your ugly and fearful thoughts. It's all of your subtle bodily reactions to the world. And I will also say that profoundness in self-knowledge isn't a little dip into the pond. If you know something and then you kind of skittle away, that's not profoundly knowing it. I mention it because that experience of sort of knowing something and then skittling away and spending the whole rest of your day or week or month as if you don't know it, that's actually extremely common. And yet, that way of engaging with knowing, having a flash of knowing in the shower and then continuing about your life as if you didn't know it, that's not sufficient for a strong foundation for a meaningful and satisfying life, which is what I'm always trying to help my clients build. In order to have that strong foundation, we have to look at the truth on a regular basis. That's what actually moves the needle. I love metaphors with my clients. So I often say it's like taking an extended swim in the swamp of who we really are. I love the metaphor of the swamp because our deepest, wholest selves can be beautiful and radiant and triumphant. They can also be very, very mucky. So I want to talk in just a minute about how we can actually stay in that authentic swamp for a longer, more profound period of time. But let's first just talk about the final part of that definition of authenticity. If authenticity is the skill of knowing yourself profoundly, we've talked about knowing yourself, we've talked about profoundly. Now let's talk about the skill side of things. I actually think there's a muscle to authenticity. We can become more skillful at authenticity than we are now, and we can actually lose our skill over time if we don't practice it. I often describe it to my clients like a telephone line, or of course, this is 2022. So let's talk about it as an internet connection between you and yourself, you and your most deep, most honest, most authentic self. For many of us, that line, that internet connection is like a really janky dial-up connection. It doesn't even work most of the time. And when it does, the dial-up speeds are just very, very, very slow. And most of us are moving so fast in our lives that we're not even waiting for that page to load. We actually think that the internet doesn't even work, but that's not true. It's just slow and really janky. And the key here is the more that you work at it, the faster and more reliable that internet connection becomes. And when you get skillful, that speed is legit fast. You know so much faster what you feel and think and need and want to do next. That experience of authenticity, which may have felt awkward and janky before, is smooth and often even seamless. And of course, it's worth it to say it's not always like that. I have very fast internet in my house. I assume you do too. We live in the future, but it still slows down and even shuts down sometimes. But typically, I work over video conference. I see most of my clients over Zoom. What a time to be alive. And your connection to your authenticity can feel like that too. So that's sort of understanding authenticity on a deeper level. I wanted to share now a couple of things that can help you cultivate authenticity more. The first one is quiet and unstimulated time. Have I lost you already? Are you turning off the podcast? Here's the thing. It's hard to know what you truly feel when you're scrolling Instagram or you're at a party with lots of people or at a coffee shop or just jumping on your workday between responding to work emails and reading a New Yorker piece and texting back your chain of friends. If you're not currently super in touch with your authentic self, it will come as a whisper and it will come slowly. That information will come very quietly and slowly, and you will not hear it. Or it will be much, much harder to hear if you are constantly stimulated. So yes, you need some time in your day when you're not taking in external stimulation from social media or music or even your partner's sparkling conversation, and you can be quiet and be with yourself. The second thing that helps you cultivate authenticity is a willingness to tolerate agitation in the body. I have observed time and time again with my clients, when we create enough quiet or lower the stimulation enough to actually be able to hear what's true for us, the first thing we often hear is that we're agitated. Agitation is a jumpiness or it's a buzziness in your body. In its more intense forms, it might feel like you might jump out of your skin. I'm going to talk more about agitation in future episodes, but the key to know about agitation is that it will not last forever. If you really feel it, if you don't push those sensations down and you don't try to ignore them or do something sort of compulsive to try to get them to go away, like eating something or going on the internet, it's honestly probably not going to last more than like 10 minutes. Your nervous system will calm, and it will calm significantly, but it may feel intense at first. So I want you to know that that's coming. And as a side note, I'm really selling authenticity, aren't I? You need to get off TikTok and you need to be willing to be agitated. And yet here's the thing. I want to warn you about these because authenticity is actually amazing. All of what's profoundly good in life is accessible via authenticity. I'm talking about meaning and truest connection and joy that is grounded, but also soaring. You will feel so much more joy when you make choices that are authentically true for you. And I think a lot of us don't access that because some of the first steps can be tough and people don't talk about that enough. Not always. They're not always tough. Sometimes you just know something that's true for you and it feels really good, but sometimes they are. So now let's go on to number 3 of the list of what will help. Number 3 is a willingness to not like things, which can feel like, oh, I'm mean or I'm negative. So here's a partial list of things that my clients have had to admit to themselves. 1, that they just didn't like the mom group that was their main social outlet. They didn't like those moms. They didn't like their vibe. 2, that they didn't enjoy spending time with their husband's family. 3, that they didn't want to spend all their free time volunteering. 4, that they didn't enjoy that trip to the beach or to Italy, just to give recent examples from 2 separate clients. Even instead of just saying, oh yeah, that trip was great, admitting to yourself, yeah, I actually didn't really like that trip that much. That is an authentic move. So for some of you, this won't be relevant, but for some of my clients, giving themselves permission to not like things, to be mean or to be negative is the key that unlocks the safe. So many of us have buried our dislikes so profoundly within us that we don't even realize they're there. So for all of these examples, it took a fair amount of digging for my clients to actually acknowledge that they disliked those things. So a question to ask yourself here would be, what don't I like that I've been pretending to like? What don't I like that I've been pretending to like? And the final thing that I think will help you cultivate your authenticity is a willingness to hear uncomfortable answers. This is similar to being willing to be perceived as, being willing to be perceived as by yourself as mean or negative, but I think there's some nuance here. Because sometimes when you listen authentically, you will hear that there is a lot wrong in your life. And that can be very uncomfortable to hear. So the first thing that I want to say about that is that for most of my clients, it's not actually as bad as it seems at first glance. So yes, maybe a few bigger decisions are needed, but mostly over time, it's really just rejiggering of their lives. It feels like everything's wrong and that everything needs to be changed, but typically it's more small tweaks. The other really important thing to say here is that often my clients hear just a lot of no's. Like when they start listening to their authentic self, they just hear no and no and no. And actually, often what's happening there is that your deepest, your most authentic self is really just saying, I'm tired. You're hearing, no, I don't want to go to that party. No, I don't want to hang out with friends. No, I don't want to go to my job. No, I don't want to work. Maybe no, I don't want to work at all. And you can start to freak out about that. Like maybe my truest self just never wants to see people again. And maybe I'm incapable of work. And again, it may be that some things need to be adjusted, friends or job, for example, but typically it's also true that you're just really, really tired. So nothing seems appealing. So that's why I start with energy, because just having more energy is key. And that's also why I follow it with authenticity, because it's really, really, really easy to waste a lot of energy if you're living a life that is not right for you. Even if you have 3 times as much energy as me, and I'm a highly sensitive person who probably has a smaller energy tank than most, you could easily have less energy than me if you misuse it by trying to be someone that you're not. One of the most energetically exhausting things that you can do, just as a side note, is try to be someone that you're not. And when I say these things, that you might actually not need to blow up your whole life, or that all of your no's might just mean that you're exhausted. One way of interpreting that could be that I'm denying your authentic truth. And I would actually say that it's just that Authenticity doesn't typically come to us as a typed up 4-page list of instructions about life. I mean, maybe it does sometimes, but typically it comes in more abstract ways. We have to interpret it a bit. So that's why I mentioned these kind of interpretation guides, things that I've seen my clients learn and work on as they got in touch with their authentic selves, and things that I've noticed too. And before we finish up here, I just want to say one last, hopefully helpful thing to know about authenticity. Here it is. The first and most important step is just to tell yourself the truth. Sometimes when we begin to realize something true, we kind of freak out. Here's an example that I heard recently, or a little while ago, from one of my clients. She told me, if I don't actually enjoy spending time with my husband's family, am I going to have to stop seeing them? That's going to cause this huge conflict with my husband. Am I going to have to say something to them? That's going to cause huge conflict with his family. Do I have to have a huge blow up with my husband? In other words, now that I know my authentic truth, do I immediately have to take big, scary action? And the answer to that question is no. No. You do not have to take big, scary action. Sometimes the fear that we immediately have to take action causes us to purposefully not know something for a while or decades. You can just know something for a while, and the act of knowing itself might be all that's needed. And if not, you can take the time to really take a breath and think about your options. And you can really sit in how you feel, what you want, what you're afraid of. And just doing that alone might eventually, totally naturally, without pushing, without rushing yourself, help you know the right action to take. So I will repeat, you do not have to jump out of the plane just because you authentically know that the plane is no longer right for you. And to give the follow-up on that example of my client who realized that she found her husband's family tiring and that they probably weren't the first people that she'd choose to hang out with, that was actually all the true action that was needed for her. So now she could just sit at family events acknowledging that truth to herself, which was, I find this tiring and I'm not really enjoying their company. And acknowledging that alone made spending time with them less tiring because she wasn't fighting herself or trying to push down her feelings of feeling tired or maybe frustrated. Also made it easier for her to be kinder to them by acknowledging that she didn't actually like them. It's a funny thing. When you're not fighting yourself, when you're just acknowledging the truth, it's actually often easier to be nicer to people you don't like. And part of this too is the whole point I made before about how trying to be someone that you're not is energetically exhausting. It's actually much less tiring to just acknowledge that you don't like something and sit there with the knowledge of it. And of course, in acknowledging her authenticity, my client also found it easier to speak up in a appropriate way at a separate time with her husband about her own needs. So making sure that she didn't commit to spending too much time with them, for example, because now she knew in her heart how much they drained her and she didn't really feel conflicted about it. She knew that she was going to take care of herself while also being there for her husband by showing up to his family, which was something that she liked her reasons for doing. And of course, with a different client in a different situation, any of these things might be different. You might choose to talk to the husband or talk to the family. I don't know. It's always dependent on the particular circumstance. But I just love this example because it reminds me that yes, sometimes authenticity is all that is needed. Okay. That is all, my friends, my team. I hope that this was helpful. And as always, I am rooting for you in the week ahead. You've got this. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.